The Tonight Show studio had its usual Tuesday night energy as Jimmy Fallon welcomed his final guest of the evening. But tucked away in the fourth row sat an unlikely pair that would soon change everything. 82-year-old Eleanor Mitchell, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, and her 28-year-old granddaughter Sarah, who had surprised her grandmother with Tonight Show tickets for her birthday. Eleanor sat with the poise of someone who had lived through 8 decades with grace, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched Jimmy interact with the audience during a commercial break. She wore a navy blue dress that Sarah had helped her pick out, complete with a delicate pearl necklace that had been a gift from her late husband Harold on their 25th wedding anniversary. Sarah kept glancing at her grandmother with a mixture of love and concern. Eleanor had been quieter lately, more withdrawn since Harold's passing 5 years ago. The vibrant woman who had once filled their house with laughter and music had slowly retreated into herself, going through the motions of daily life, but missing the spark that had always defined her. "Grandma, are you having fun?" Sarah whispered during a commercial break. Eleanor's eyes twinkled for the first time in months. "Oh, sweetheart, this reminds me of the old variety shows Harold and I used to watch. He would have loved this." Jimmy, who had been chatting with audience members between segments, found himself drawn to the elderly woman in the fourth row. Something about her demeanor, the way she held herself with quiet dignity while her eyes sparkled with memories, caught his attention. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jimmy said, making his way over to Eleanor's row. "I'm Jimmy. What's your name?" Eleanor's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Eleanor Mitchell, dear, and this is my granddaughter Sarah." "Eleanor, what a beautiful name," Jimmy said, crouching down to her eye level. "What brings you to the show tonight?" "It's my 82nd birthday," Eleanor replied with a shy smile. Sarah thought this would be a nice adventure. The audience around them began to applaud, and Jimmy's face broke into his signature grin. 82nd birthday? Well, we can't let that go by without celebration. Would you like to come up and join me on stage? Sarah squeezed her grandmother's hand encouragingly. "Go on, Grandma. You deserve this." Eleanor hesitated for just a moment, then nodded with surprising determination. Why not? Harold always said life's too short to say no to adventures. As Eleanor made her way to the stage with Sarah's help, Jimmy couldn't help but notice the grace in her movements despite her age. She carried herself like someone who had once been very comfortable in the spotlight, though she seemed humble about it now. Once seated in the guest chair, Eleanor looked out at the audience with wonder. "Goodness, it's bright up here," she laughed, shielding her eyes slightly. "So, Eleanor, tell me about yourself," Jimmy said, settling into his host chair. "What did you do before you retired?" Eleanor's eyes took on a distant quality, as if she was looking back through decades of memories. "Oh, many things, dear. I was a secretary for most of my working years." "But before that?" She paused, a wistful smile crossing her face. "Before that, I was a dancer." "A dancer?" Jimmy leaned forward with genuine interest. "What kind of dancing?" "Ballroom mainly. Harold and we met at a dance hall in 1962, the Starlight Ballroom on 42nd Street. It's long gone now." Eleanor's voice grew softer, more distant. He was the most handsome man I'd ever seen, standing there in his navy suit, too nervous to ask anyone to dance. The studio had grown quieter, the audience sensing they were hearing something special. Even the camera operator seemed to lean in closer. "So, how did you two end up dancing together?" Jimmy asked gently. Eleanor chuckled, her hands unconsciously moving as if she was still feeling the memory in her muscles. "Well, I wasn't going to wait all night for him to work up the courage. I walked right up to him and said, 'Are you going to ask me to dance, or are we going to stand here all evening looking at each other?'" The audience laughed warmly, and Jimmy grinned. I like your style, Eleanor. What happened next? He took my hand, Eleanor said, her voice growing tender, and we danced to Moon River. 3.5 minutes that changed both our lives forever. We danced every Friday night at the Starlight for the next 3 years until we got married. That's beautiful, Jimmy said softly. Did you keep dancing after you got married? Eleanor's expression shifted, becoming both joyful and melancholic. Oh yes, we danced for 54 years, every Friday night, no matter what. In ballrooms, in our living room, at our children's weddings, at anniversary parties. Harold used to say that as long as we could dance together, we'd never grow old. When did you stop dancing? Jimmy asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Eleanor's composure wavered slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 years ago, the day we buried Harold. I couldn't imagine dancing without him. It felt like betraying our memory somehow. The studio fell completely silent. Jimmy felt tears prick his eyes as he absorbed the weight of Eleanor's loss and the depth of her love for her late husband. Eleanor, Jimmy said gently, do you miss it? Dancing, I mean? Eleanor nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Every single day. But you see, dear, when you've danced with the same person for 54 years, their rhythm becomes part of your heartbeat. I still feel him there sometimes when I hear our old songs, but I haven't been able to bring myself to actually move to the music. Jimmy looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then at Sarah, who was crying openly in the audience. Behind him, the Roots sat quietly, Questlove's hands poised over his drums as if ready to provide whatever musical support might be needed. Eleanor, Jimmy said, standing up from his chair, I have a crazy idea. Would you be willing to try something with me? Eleanor looked up at him with curiosity and perhaps a hint of anticipation. What did you have in mind? Well, I'm not Harold, and I'm definitely not as good a dancer as he was, Jimmy said, extending his hand toward her. But I was wondering if you might honor us all by sharing just one dance. I think Harold would want you to remember how beautiful dancing can be. Eleanor stared at Jimmy's outstretched hand, her breath catching. Oh, I haven't danced in so long. I don't know if I remember how. Eleanor, Jimmy said softly, his voice carrying across the now silent studio. I bet your body remembers every step. Love like that doesn't just disappear. It lives in your muscles, in your heart, in the way you move through the world. Sarah stood up in the audience, tears streaming down her face. Grandma, please. Grandpa would want you to dance again. He'd want you to feel joy again. Eleanor looked at Sarah, then back at Jimmy's waiting hand. Slowly, as if awakening from a long sleep, she placed her weathered hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. What was your song? Jimmy asked. The one you and Harold always danced to? Moon River, Eleanor replied without hesitation. Always Moon River. Jimmy turned to the Roots. Guys, do you know Moon River? Questlove nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the moment. We got you, Jimmy. As the gentle, familiar melody began to fill the studio, something magical happened to Eleanor. Her posture straightened, her eyes brightened, and for a moment, decades seemed to fall away from her face. She looked up at Jimmy with a smile that held both profound sadness and unexpected joy. Just follow my lead, Jimmy said softly as he placed one hand gently on Eleanor's waist and took her other hand in his. Eleanor nodded, and as they began to move, it was clear that her body did indeed remember. Her steps were tentative at first, but within moments, she was moving with a grace and fluidity that spoke of decades of practice and muscle memory deeply ingrained. Oh my, Eleanor whispered as they swayed together. I'd forgotten how wonderful this feels. Jimmy guided her through a simple box step, then gradually into more complex movements as Eleanor's confidence returned. The camera operators moved carefully around them, capturing every moment of this unexpected and beautiful dance. "You're a lovely dancer, Jimmy," Eleanor said, her voice stronger now, more alive than it had been all evening. "You're making me look good," Jimmy replied with a genuine smile. "I can tell you've done this before." As they moved together across the stage, Eleanor began to speak, her voice dreamy and distant. "Harold was 6 feet 2 inches, you know. I always felt so safe in his arms. Like nothing could hurt me as long as we were dancing. He had this way of making me feel like we were the only two people in the world." The audience watched in reverent silence, many openly weeping at the beauty of the moment. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing something sacred, something real and profound about love and loss and the courage to live fully even after heartbreak. "Eleanor," Jimmy said as they continued to move together, "can you feel him with you right now?" Eleanor's response sent chills through everyone in the studio. "Oh, yes, dear. He's here. I can feel him guiding my steps, feel his hand on my back. He's telling me it's okay to dance again, that he's not really gone as long as I keep moving to the music." As the song neared its end, Eleanor looked up at Jimmy with tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of joy, of rediscovered connection, of a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me back my dance." The song ended, but Jimmy didn't immediately let go. He held Eleanor's hands gently and looked into her eyes. "Eleanor, Harold was right. You haven't grown old. You're still that beautiful woman who was brave enough to ask a nervous man to dance." Eleanor laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy that seemed to lift the spirits of everyone in the studio. "He'd be laughing at me right now. You know, crying on national television like this." "I think he'd be proud," Jimmy said. "I think he'd be proud that you were brave enough to dance again." As they slowly made their way back to the guest chair, something had fundamentally changed in Eleanor. Her posture was different, her energy transformed. She looked like a woman who had just remembered something essential about herself. "Eleanor," Jimmy said as she settled back into her chair, "I have to ask, will you dance again, now that you remember how good it feels?" Eleanor looked out at the audience, then at Sarah, who was beaming with pride and joy. "You know what? I think I will. In fact, Sarah, there's a lovely ballroom at the community center near my house. What do you say we sign up for some lessons together?" Sarah stood up again, applauding enthusiastically. "Yes, Grandma, I'd love that." The audience erupted in applause, but it was different from the usual television applause. This was organic, emotional, real. People were celebrating not just a performance, but a human being reclaiming a piece of herself that she thought was lost forever. As the applause continued, Jimmy made an announcement that surprised even the production staff. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that Eleanor just taught us all something important tonight. She taught us that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It lives on in the things that brought us joy, in the memories that make us smile, in the courage to keep dancing even when the music seems to have stopped." Eleanor wiped her eyes and looked at Jimmy with deep gratitude. "Harold used to say that dancing was the closest thing to flying that regular people could do tonight. I flew again." When the cameras finally stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, Eleanor didn't rush to leave. She sat with Jimmy for another half hour, sharing stories about her life with Harold, about the dances they'd shared, about the love that had sustained them through 5 decades of marriage. "You know," Eleanor told him, "Harold would have liked you. He always said the best dancers were the ones who knew how to make their partners shine." Jimmy was deeply moved by the compliment. "Eleanor, you made tonight special for all of us. You reminded us what real love looks like." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's story spread far beyond that single night. The video of their dance became one of the most watched clips in Tonight Show history. not because it was funny or viral, but because it reminded people of the enduring power of love and the importance of not letting grief steal away the things that bring us joy. Eleanor kept her promise to Sarah. They enrolled in ballroom dancing classes together, and within months, Eleanor was teaching younger students, sharing the joy and grace that she and Harold had discovered so many years ago at the Starlight Ballroom. 6 months later, Eleanor returned to The Tonight Show, this time with Sarah as her dancing partner. They performed a beautiful waltz together, 3 generations of women celebrating the power of movement, music, and memory. Eleanor had written Jimmy a letter that she read on air. "Dear Jimmy, you gave me back more than a dance that night. You gave me back myself. Harold and I are still dancing, and now Sarah is learning our steps. Love doesn't end. It just finds new ways to move through the world." The episode became a touchstone for conversations about grief, healing, and the courage to embrace joy even after loss. Dancing schools across the country reported an increase in enrollment from older adults, many of whom specifically mentioned Eleanor's story as their inspiration. Eleanor continued to dance well into her 80s, becoming something of a local celebrity in her community. She often said that the night she danced with Jimmy Fallon was the night she learned that Harold hadn't left her alone. He had simply taught her to carry their love in a new way, one step at a time. Jimmy kept in touch with Eleanor and Sarah, sending birthday cards and occasionally calling to check in. Eleanor's story had changed him too, reminding him that sometimes the most powerful moments in television happen when you stop trying to entertain and simply allow authentic human connection to unfold. That Tuesday night when an 82-year-old woman rediscovered her ability to dance, everyone in the studio learned something profound about resilience, love, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the music seems to have stopped. Eleanor Mitchell didn't just dance that night, she flew, and she taught everyone watching that it's never too late to remember how to soar.